All right, so you've decided to start photography, you're ready to go, you've psyched yourself up, only to realize you have no idea where to start. Well, today we're going to talk about the essential items you should get before you start in photography. I'm not going to go over the million different things you should buy, I'm only going to stick to 9, so we're going to try to keep it simple today. So if you're ready to go, it's time to learn. Hello and welcome back. I'm really excited for today's episode because we are going to talk about photography equipment, otherwise known as toys. They can get really expensive, so honestly, while it is fun to buy new equipment, it can also be quite intimidating, especially when you're getting started. So today, we're going to talk about 9 items that you need in order to get started. All right, so let's get started with number 1. Probably the most obvious thing we're going to talk about today is that you need a camera. I know that's really obvious, but again, we're starting with the basics. So, the reason I'm talking about a camera is because you really need to decide first whether you want to start with digital or whether you want to start with film. Now, when talking about these two things, I'm not going to get into iPhone or Android or mobile device in general photography. I'm also not going to be talking about point and shoots. When I talk about digital photography or film photography, I'm really just going to get into ones that you have interchangeable lenses. Interchangeable meaning you can take it off, remove it, change it for something else. So again, I'm not going to get into point and shoot, and I'm not going to get into mobile for now. So every camera is going to be unique in that the body style, the way the dials are set, even down to the way that the light meter works. So it's going to be really specific to you and what you're looking for. So I highly suggest doing some research to figure out what camera you want, because depending on what you're going to shoot is going to depend on what camera that you want. So I would really suggest figuring out what you want to shoot first and then go after the camera that you want based off the reviews and different things that people use that camera for. So that's my suggestion. So personally, I started with film because I thought it would teach me more. I have a better understanding of composition, light, even color, and also it takes a lot of patience, and it's a little expensive. Now, digital can be quite expensive on the upfront as well, buying the camera, buying the lenses, buying the editing software and things like that, but film is kind of a continuous expense. So you have to take those things into consideration too when picking the correct camera for you. All right, so number 2. Lenses. Sometimes it's a common misconception that you would get a lens with the camera that you're buying. That is true in some circumstances. My last Canon 70D that I bought did actually come with 2 kit lenses, which were perfectly fine, especially to start with. I will say that not all digitals and not all film cameras come with lenses. So again, it depends on what you're shooting. For instance, I'm shooting with a 50mm 1.8 f-stop lens because I want good low light, I want to get a very shallow depth of field so you can see my background is quite blurred, and I really didn't need a zoom lens or anything like that. So it's a fixed lens, meaning it only has one focal length, which is 50mm. But again, depending on what you're shooting, if you plan on shooting sports photography, landscape, portraiture, any of those different things, do your research, figure out which lenses work the best for those things that you want to shoot. If your camera comes with a lens, double check to make sure it's what you're looking for, because you don't want to pay more money for a lens that you're not going to use. And sometimes the kit lenses that come with it are not going to fit the situation that you're looking for. So do your research, figure out which lenses work best for the situations or environment you want to shoot with, and then go with that. All right, 3rd on the list. You need to figure out a way of how to store your images. So whether that's going to be in digital form, you'll need an SD card or a compact flash depending on the kind of camera you have. So make sure that you buy the camera first before you figure out how you want to store the images digitally, if that's your choice. Same kind of goes with film. With a 35mm camera, you'll be buying 35mm film. If you buy a twin lens camera or something that takes 120mm film, you're going to have to buy the appropriate film for that as well. So first you have to choose the camera, then you have to choose how are you going to store your images. In terms of an SD card or compact flash, there are varying options. Of course, there's the storage size, anywhere from 8 gig all the way up to 256, or even more in some cases. There's also different options as far as writing speeds. So some SD cards will say that they have a faster way of writing the image to the card. The biggest advice I can give you really is just do your research and review them. I don't particularly buy the most expensive, and I don't really buy the cheapest either. Typically, I go down the middle of the road. So in the case of film, you have to pick the correct ISO for what you're going to be shooting. An ISO is on the front of the film. Typically, it tells you what speed it is, and that's talking about the light sensitivity. We're a little spoiled when it comes to digital cameras because you can change the ISO anytime that you want. But with film, when you buy it, that's all you get. Once you put it in that camera, you really can't take it back out. So you have to choose what you're going to be shooting and buy the film according to what you'll shoot. I typically shoot landscape and portraiture, so I stick towards the lower ISO, 100s, 200s, things like that. They do go lower. I don't typically shoot with anything lower than a 100 or a 200, but they are out there. So again, everything is going to be dependent upon what you're going to be shooting. So if you're going to be shooting sports, portraiture, whatever, you have to pick the correct SD card or compact flash or the film to go with what you're choosing to shoot. All right, so next up is item number 4. A tripod. A tripod is very important. Now, when I said that some of these items may or may not be essential, this is one of those ones that you can probably get away with in the beginning without having, but I'd really strongly suggest against it. Street photography is one of those things that you could shoot without a tripod because you're literally out there on the streets and it's usually fairly fast paced. Now, if you're set up somewhere and you're shooting some images as people walk by, things like that, you may want to set up with a tripod. So there's still an instance where you may want one. For most things you're going to be shooting, you really should have a tripod, especially when it comes to landscape photography, portrait, wedding, really just about everything. I can come up with an instance where you probably should have a tripod. Landscape for me especially is one of those items that if I want to get the slow down shutter to smooth out the water or the clouds or things like that, you have to have a tripod. When considering a tripod, you want to consider how tall can the tripod go, how compact it can be if you're going to be traveling with it, how heavy it is, what is it made out of, how sturdy is it. There's a lot of considerations when it comes to these. The other thing you want to think about is the head of the tripod. I particularly think it's important to get a ball head. That way you can do very slight adjustments with the camera. So again, everyone has their own styles of tripods that they like, but I like the ball head with a level. The levels are really nice. Also, sometimes they have one level, sometimes they have 2 levels. Sometimes the level is underneath the plate, so once you put the camera on, you can no longer see the level. Sometimes they have levels on the outside, which I would really strongly suggest that. I particularly like ones that are also compact and lightweight, so I can take them with me because I do take a lot of photography outside of my home or a studio. So again, those are all things to consider when getting a tripod. All right, item number 5. An external flash. A lot of people probably won't think about this one right off the bat, but it's really a good idea to have an external flash. When I talk about external, I mean one off of the camera, an off-camera flash. A lot of the cameras these days will have a little pop-up flash on the front, but if you want a deer in the headlights look, then go with that. Most photographers will not use the onboard flash. You might be able to use it as some fill light and it won't be so bright in your face, but typically they do not look very good. Some cameras these days don't actually have flash. And honestly, this one that I'm using does not have one, nor does my Canon AE1. So I kind of need one. The external flash allows for a lot of creativity. One, you can angle the flash if it's on your camera anywhere you want. You can bounce light from the ceiling, off of a wall, anything. You also have the ability to move it to a different area, all while your camera is completely separate. So if I want my light coming from this direction or this direction, but I want my camera coming from over there, you can do that with external flashes. Other ways to soften the light is you can get a diffuser and put it straight on the external flash. Gary Fong actually makes a pretty cool one where it has a white dome or a yellow dome to have more of a warm light, but there's several ones out there that you can use. So again, I highly suggest an external flash. Item number 6. A camera bag. Imagine, you just bought this nice camera, you're walking down the street, you're interchanging lenses, and all of a sudden, boom, you drop something, completely smash the glass on the camera. You probably could have avoided that by having a bag. There's a lot of scenarios where a bag is really important to have in order to protect and transport the camera. Now, when I first got my camera bag, I started with a lunch bag padded on the inside. I had one lens and one camera body, so I really didn't need any separation between anything. It made it really simple and very cheap. Now, if you have a little more money, you probably want to spring for an actual camera bag. The next one that I had was one that was a sling bag. I could pull it in front of me, and it had a side compartment where I could take the camera directly out from the bag without removing the bag from me. I love that bag, and I still have it, and I've had it for years. It's done really well. I think it's a lower pro sling bag. I also think that it's been discontinued at this point, but lower pro makes a ton of good bags. Now, depending on what you're going to be shooting is also depending on the kind of bag that you want to get. If you're going to have several lenses, you have to make sure that your bag can accommodate. If you want to travel, you want to keep it light and compact that still probably allows for a few lenses and maybe even a tripod on the side. So you have to make sure that you're getting a bag that is going to fit your needs depending on what you're going to be shooting. All right, item number 7. A strap. You need to have a camera strap. Don't be like me. I do have one of my cameras that I do not have a strap for, and it's mostly because I'm really picky about them. But a strap is ridiculously important, even more so than a camera bag, I'd say. Maybe even more so than a tripod. But really though, you have to have a camera strap. You don't want to be carrying this thing around by hand all while trying to shoot. You really have to have something that will secure around you. Now, there's a lot of really cool different kinds. There's ones that will go around crossbody. There's ones that just go around your neck. There's some that are more padded. There's some that, in my particular case, I can take the camera off of the strap. It still has the plate attached to the bottom, and then I can then put the camera directly onto the tripod. I really like it. I think it's by Polar Pro. It's a really great strap. I will say the one thing I'm not particularly enjoying of that strap is that it probably could use a little more padding. So when I'm out and about, it gets a little uncomfortable if I'm using it for a long time, but for the most part, it does a great job. So again, depending on what you're shooting and what your preferences are, whether you want a crossbody or around the neck, they even have ones that have multiple straps across the chest and all these different hooks that you can put lenses and camera bodies on and things like that. Just make sure to do your research. What do other people say they like about it? What do people say they don't like about it? Of course, some of these can get really expensive. So with any of these items that I'm talking about, look at used. There's no problem with doing used. I still buy used items all the time, especially with straps and camera bags and things like that. A little bit of scuff and wear and tear won't kill the bag or the strap. All right, on to number 8. A computer. Probably most people these days have a computer, but if you don't, it's really important to have one. Now, you may say, I'm shooting film. I'm not going to need that. Everything is going to be in the camera, me developing my film, and then going straight to a dark room. If you are one of those people that has the ability and the time and the money to shoot film, develop it yourself, and then also have a dark room or a lab so that you can print your own silver gelatin prints or whatever it is you're printing, then go for it. But honestly, at some point, you're probably going to want to market your work, have a website, things like that. So a computer is of the utmost importance. So a computer is one of those items that isn't necessarily dependent upon what you're going to be shooting. It's more dependent upon how much you're going to be shooting. So for me, I use a 15-inch MacBook Pro Retina with a terabyte solid-state hard drive. Now, I did not have that up until maybe a few months ago. I was using a 13-inch MacBook Pro Retina with a 512 gig solid-state hard drive. So I quickly realized that as I continue to get more into this, especially with YouTube, I need to have a larger screen for editing, and I need to have more space in order to store my videos. They take up a lot of space. Images can take up a lot of space too. Now, with me saying that, you don't have to buy a Mac. You will probably notice that most creators use Macs. But again, I use a Windows machine as well for other purposes, but for my creative process, I use a Mac. Now, again, depending on what you want to start with and how much you're going to be shooting, I would highly suggest at least 512 gigs, if not a terabyte or 2 terabytes on the computer itself. I would also suggest a solid-state hard drive. They are just quicker, and honestly, they're a little more dependable. I personally think you should get a solid-state hard drive. Retina screen makes everything look beautiful, and a 15-inch screen just makes it easier for viewing. So again, strongly suggest a computer, probably an obvious one, but if you have questions on what you should be picking, just let me know. All right, last but not least, item number 9. Since we just talked about a computer, we now have to talk about photo editing software. Now again, you're saying I'm purely going to be shooting film, I'm not going to do any editing at all, I want to be a purist, which is how I used to be. You may be able to get away with not having photo editing software, but the problem is if you're going to develop and scan or digitize, you're really going to need some sort of editing software. Now, there's gobs of different software out there. I particularly like using the Adobe suite. I started on Photoshop, I continue to use Photoshop these days, and I also use Lightroom, which is geared more towards photographers. Because there's so many different options out there, just like anything else we've talked about, you have to figure out what you're going to be shooting in order to figure out what type of editing software you want to use. I started getting into astrophotography, and that requires a whole set of different programs. So I will say that I do use the Adobe suite, and it is a monthly subscription, so it's a little easier on your wallet, but it is month to month. I'm pretty sure that you can buy yearly subscriptions as well if you want to go that route. Now, those can be a beast to learn. So again, there's a lot of resources out there for YouTube. I will probably teach you a little bit about Lightroom and Photoshop later, some basic photo editing, because the whole goal of this YouTube is to go over the basics. So, photo editing software is very important, maybe not immediately essential, but honestly, yeah, it's probably essential. All right, you made it. 9 items and you can get started in photography. And like I said before, buy used if you can. Now, when I say buy used, buy reputable. Not to say that you can't buy from a person off of eBay, which I have done before, but you do have to be careful. You have to really look at the item before you're buying it, especially when it comes to camera and lenses. You have to make sure that it's not a knockoff, unless that's what you're looking for, and you have to make sure that there's no fog or scratching in the lens, because condensation and things like that are not good when it comes to lenses. Now, you can also buy new if you're looking for something very particular and you want to start off fresh, and that's perfectly fine too. It will cost you a little bit more money. All right, everyone, thank you so much for joining today. I'll make sure to put the items that I use in the description below. If you have any questions or comments, just leave them in the comment section. Also, if you're looking for some cool gear like the shirt I'm wearing today, check out my website. I'll continually add things to it, and I just added a new t-shirt design the other day. All right, guys, make sure to stick around for the next video because we're going to be talking about good beginner cameras. We're going to talk about 35mm, and we're going to talk about digital SLR as well. So make sure to stick around for that. Bye, everyone.